Hi everyone, Ames Velo athlete here. In this video I will be covering what happened at the 2022 Pella Roubaix mixed surface race, so stay tuned. The first thing I would like to cover is the course, and honestly calling it a mixed surface race is kind of a stretch. Through my perspective it felt mostly gravel, and the paved road was honestly pretty sparse. The length of this race was just under 69 miles, with a total of 3,000 feet of elevation gain. There were some defining features at the start of the course that were crucial to understand before even the race started in order to do well, and more on that later. The general direction follows these arrows. The route leads you in a counterclockwise flow, and on this day the wind was also a tough feature. The weather reported winds coming from the south at up to 26 miles per hour, and gusts that were reaching upwards of 44 miles per hour. That means in the last 10 miles or so, riders would be battling severe winds at a point of already being totally exhausted. Now let's cover some of the key features that happened during this race. But before diving into racing strategy, I would like to explain all these numbers that you're seeing on the screen, because it can be overwhelming the first time you see this, and my audience may not all be bike racers. Starting in the bottom right corner, we have total distance in miles, the duration of the race counting right next to that, as well as cadence measured in RPMs. Cadence is how many revolutions per minute my legs are spinning. Below this is percent grade. It will be a positive value when going uphill, should read out 0 when I'm riding on a flat road, and it should read out a negative value when descending. I also have speed in both miles and kilometers per hour for my European compadres. Above this is the course map that you just saw earlier. And I would like to also introduce my GPS map marker, Karma. She is my 8-year-old cat who knows what her num-nums are.
Karma, what num-num?
You guys can just sit out there and pick up questions, and
What num-num?
I'll just kind of babble up here.
Anyway, back to the numbers. The last set on the bottom left corner shows my real-time heart rate and power I'm putting out during the race. Now let's dive into some of the exciting bits of the race. Unfortunately, my GoPro overheated and died at around mile 47, and I do already have the first 47 miles played out completely already on YouTube, so I couldn't catch the last 20 miles. However, this was around the same point where I got dropped from the breakaway. The rest of the race would have basically been me riding alone, so not missing much there. Here we see what is known as an attack. Essentially what that is a rider will do a surge in energy, almost like a sprint, in order to gain some distance between himself or their self and the riders behind them. But honestly, like, you can chase this down right away, but if you look at our distance right here, we're like barely at 3.5 miles into this race. So that means this guy has to basically defend all of us from chasing him for like 65 miles, which, like, even Matt wouldn't do that, honestly. Like, the whole point of racing is to be smart, right? Know what your strengths are, know what your weaknesses are, definitely, and honestly, like, race the race that you want to perform as. For me, I want it to come down to a sprint, right? But I would like to not be sprinting against all of these guys. I would like to do it in a reduced group. And here you see in the blue shoes, blue socks, is Matt Dennis. Spoilers, Matt ends up taking the W for our team. We rode the breakaway with, initially it was 4 other guys, and then we shed a guy and it came down to 3. I will be covering how Matt broke away later in this video. So skipping ahead here a little bit, it's about 2 miles later, we ended up catching him. You can kind of see his red blinky light there. And this is also, I'd like to say that we're going straight into a headwind. So if you kind of understand how birds fly, if you're going into a headwind, it would benefit you the most to be behind riders like I am right now. Now we're turning left. Now the wind has changed. Now the wind is coming from the right side of the screen to the left side of the screen. So if you want to get a draft, remember like flying like birds, you kind of want a rider to your right. And at this point I said, screw it, you know, like it's not worth getting guttered in the crosswind, and I'll explain guttering here in a moment. So I kind of sprint across to Matt, and I yell at Matt, I'm like, hey Matt, come on, let's go. And if you look at my watts here, I don't immediately surge it straight up to 500. I want to make sure Matt is in my draft, and I don't want to, like, you know, it's kind of like bullying him around, like make him sprint to get into my draft is not the right move. So if you look here, I'll pause the video. Looking at this still right here, you'll see that there's a yellow line in the center of the road, and with all intents and purposes, the yellow line serves as a barrier, right? So if a race official sees you cross the yellow line and you're now going into oncoming traffic, even though there's no cars there, like it's an open road, they will just straight up disqualify you. And I have seen that before, where riders are riding in oncoming traffic, the oncoming traffic lane, and they're just thrown out of the race. So if you look here, the way I'm positioning right now is that I'm all the way to the left as far as I can, just leaving enough space for Matt to be in my draft, marked by this red bar here. That means when you're in the crosswind, I'm putting everyone else in the gutter. So whatever power, whatever effort I'm doing on the front, everyone else behind me except for Matt has to do that same effort. And for me, like 500 watts is going pretty deep, but again, I still have over 60 miles in the race. I'm not gonna completely empty my legs right here and drain my energy levels all the way down to 0. I just want to make it hard for everyone else and potentially create a split. And if you just heard me, I know the wind is blowing right now, but I looked back and I told Matt we got a gap, and his reaction was just like a laugh, because like honestly, like this early into a race to have a split was kind of comical, because we were talking to people after the race, and it was like a general consensus that a lot of the strong riders in the peloton were just caught off guard. There were people who were bridging up to us, and it's really key to communicate with your teammates what's going on, because at one point there was one guy who bridged up to us, and I'm yelling at Matt, like, leave, like, move over to the right, because we have one more coming. So, like, you know, like, again, I feel like a broken record. There's over 60 miles left in this race, so if we could recruit more people to help us, you know, like probably not more than 7 or 8 people, then that's just way better, right? So we can just ride like we're flying like birds, right? And share the draft and share the energy. Welcome to Christmas Tree Hill. So I think I mentioned it earlier in the video, understanding some of the course features before the race starts and planning strategy around that with your teammates. So we knew that there was going to be a crosswind section of paved road before this pretty decent climb. And so putting everyone in the gutter in that crosswind section and splitting the group before this climb was a key success to making a reduced group. And I think it was around this point where I'm yelling at Matt, like, dude, we're caught. Like, because if I just turn around, I see, like, the peloton is just right there, right behind us, right? But Matt, being the smart rider he is, he's like, no, dude. Like, he didn't actually say this to me, but he told me with his body language. Like, he got to the front and just kept the power down and just kept motoring along. Because if you think about it, the riders that are just behind us in this peloton, they're in the red. They're in the red just like us, except more recently, right? Because we made the move, we got a gap, and then we could kind of monitor our pace around. They had to bridge the gap to us, and now they're the most recent redlining riders compared to us, even though my heart rate is just like cheapers, almost 190. And if you look at my power, like, I don't want to dive too deep into power numbers because I could totally nerd out about that, but if you're looking at around like 390 watts, so my threshold is 311 watts. So if I'm putting out any power that's over 311 watts, That's essentially inefficient for my body. Now I can do that, but I can't sustain that for a long period of time, right? And this is an endurance sport, right? There's a lot of road to be raced. So I'm like, oh, 600 watts and my heart rate's like approaching max heart rate here. So like I am dying right now. Like this is not easy, but I'm racing my bike. So I'm having like the greatest time ever. And like Matt just gets done pulling here. And effectively there's me and Matt on Ames Velo, and there's these two Sakari riders. We're on two different teams, but basically we're on the same team because we all have the same like mutual goal of winning this race. And the best way to win a race is in a reduced group, right? Like this, especially on gravel. Because like if you look here, Matt almost just loses his front wheel there. And like gravel racing, there's so much obstacles and it's just not a road, right? You have to know where your lines are, and like we have to be very cognizant of, look at that puddle. Like you could take the wrong line and just like hit a pothole and just like you just flat out, right? So right at this point it's just the four of us and we're just like motoring along, and now our gap is increasing. There's still some like riders in what's known as no man's land. So what no man's land is, basically you're in a area where there's a front group in front of you, but then there's the peloton behind you. So like you're stuck either like putting out more energy trying to catch the front group, or letting off the gas and just sitting up and getting back and trying to recover back into the peloton. So this guy gives me the elbow flick, if you caught that. And basically what that means is he's done his pull and I have to go to the front now. Now skipping ahead just a bit more here, we're at mile 16 and a half. And sorry folks, like my bolts of my GoPro weren't tight enough, so the camera kept getting pushed around, and now the camera's just, like in my opinion, it's just angled way too far down. You can just like see my entire front wheel. Anyway, so now this is the part where there's just 5 of us, basically. There was one guy who was kind of like working with us, or he wasn't working with us, he was like riding with us, and he wasn't doing any pulls, and eventually he got dropped, which like kudos to him, because he knew his limits, and like he knew that like the pace that we were riding was not sustainable for him. So like instead of just completely blowing up and just like not being able to pedal his legs, he decided to sit up and just ride his own race, which again, another spoiler, he ended up catching me in like the last under 12 miles or so. It was him and another dude, and it was at that point where I was like, geez, there's like, I ended up getting 18th. So I went from the, like, if we were to finish right now, I probably would have gotten 5th, like last in this group. But I ended up going from 5th to 18th because like I was just like completely done for. Like the whole point of me is I wanted to ride for Matt, right? So I'm riding for my teammate. So like I'm doing whatever I can to make him win this race. And Matt's doing his pull right here. So if there's like, if someone tries to attack right now, if someone tries to attack out of this group of 5, it would be my job to chase them down, right? If anything happened to Matt, it would be my job to try and to like protect Matt. Like that's my whole like goal right now. So right now we're just kind of chilling, doing our pulls. And if you look at my heart rate, it finally came down from like upper 180s and around 190 to like 178, which is good. Like after that initial attack and like where the race is really hard, you want to like settle down and get out of that red zone, right? You kind of want to settle into a tempo that's sustainable, because again, we still have like 50 more miles to race, right? So there not much happened here, honestly. I'm gonna skip ahead and show you how Matt broke away, or like the spot where Matt got away, and he literally rode for like something like 45 or something miles solo for the win. So like kudos to Matt. All right, here's about the spot where Matt broke away, and he's on the front right now. And again, if you look at my map marker, we're facing towards the left, so the wind is coming from the left and to the right. And again, flying like birds, sometimes riding in gravel you don't really get to get a draft, so I should be on the right side of this guy's wheel. But again, it's kind of tricky with gravel. There are certain spots where it would be more beneficial to be out of the draft, like if there's a giant pothole, for example. So you see Matt, he's on the front, and he has a little gap right here. And he's not like sprinting by any means. He's not attacking. He's just riding away, which is an efficient way to break away. Like, this is the most efficient thing you could do, is just ride away from people. And then there's this dog, like, just full on tries to like say hello to us, and we're like, no dude, get out of here, we're racing our bikes. And look, Matt is like right there. He's like maybe like 2 seconds away from us, and these three guys like are like not panicking like what we saw in the earlier race, like the guy who just like sprinted away at like mile 3. Like, these guys are like, dude, he's not gonna get away, right? Spoilers, he does get away. And so like, honestly, these guys should have probably like just started sprinting, like a full-on full gas effort to try and catch Matt. That would have been the smartest idea, in my opinion. It would have sucked for me though, because I would be also trying to sprint, trying to hold their wheels. But like, this is where teamwork comes into play, right? So Matt, he's on my team. It would be the dumbest thing for me to get on the front of this group right here and try and chase my teammate back. So essentially, with like, this is how bike racing works, right? So it's up to these 3 other riders to chase Matt back, and I had like, then I get to sit back here in the draft. Look at me like doing around like 100 watts. So I'm basically trying to like not do any work or interfere with this chase. And they were somewhat organized for some of it, but again, like, it just felt like these 2 Sakari guys were doing the lion's share of the work. And when like this other, I'm not really sure what team he was on, like this other random guy, he was super strong. Like, anytime he would get to the front, it felt like I was doing like 400 watts, even though I was like in his draft, like on the back of the group. But like, you see here, like the Sakari guy gets like a gap on us, and I'm like, that's not like a sprinting gap, that's just kind of like a gap through the corner, so I wasn't really worried. And like, you see how inefficient this is? Like, we have a Sakari guy with a gap, and then another Sakari guy chasing his own teammate down just to like bridge the gap and start chasing Matt again. Like, this chase right now is like completely inefficient, and it speaks to like how gravel races work, right? So like, it benefits you the most to be at the front of the race in a gravel race, especially when the road can be quite unpredictable. And I have never ridden any roads out by Pella, like road or gravel, so I don't know, other than the GPS that I have on my bike computer, I don't know what's going to happen. Like, I don't know what exactly is paved and what is like gravel, and I don't even know if like any of these roads turn into B roads. So like, being at the front of the race is tremendously beneficial. So now we roll into this like chase Matt down mode while I kind of like sit in and not really do anything. And I'm sitting here second wheel, so like, anytime I get towards the front, like, I just stop pedaling. And if someone were to attack me, I would let the other guys like chase him down, depending on like which guy's attacking. Now at this point, it honestly turns into like not that much happening, because it's just us 4, the group of 4 that I'm in, 3 guys that are like chasing or trying to chase, and eventually they give up. And so now it's basically the 2nd and 3rd places for the podium that are up for grabs. And I would like to jump ahead a little bit, about 20-ish miles to where I get dropped in the race. Alright, jumping ahead a little bit, right now we're in a tailwind, so we are absolutely flying. Like, going 35, 36 on a gravel road is absolutely bananas. And you see that stop ahead sign. So we'll be taking a left-hand turn coming up here in a second onto a paved road. And when we do this tailwind will transition into a left to right crosswind. So effectively, the wind is going to blow you to the far side of the road as you look at it now. And this guy, like, he chose a poor line going through it, and he, like, I guess the wind kind of just blew him into the ditch. Like, I've seen it happen before where the crosswind is just so bananas that, like, you just get blown off the road. So, like, this, I was like, okay, that's kind of cool. Like, there's one less rider with us. But then this Sakari guy just was like, yeah, he's strong. He'll probably catch us. So he actually does catch back up with us. And at this point of the race, like, I am just dying right now. Even though I was, like, supposedly getting a draft and kind of just sitting in and not doing any work, like, there were so many surges up these rolling gravel roads that my legs are absolutely fried. And being a smart rider, this Sakari guy, he puts me in the gutter right here. Like, and then he kind of, like, swerves off, but then he goes back into the gutter. So, like, I'm effectively doing the same amount of work as this Sakari rider right now. But it's, like, if you look at the grade, we're going downhill, so it's not that big of a deal yet. But if you look just ahead on the road, it starts to go uphill again. And that is exactly where I come into trouble. So the road is kind of flattening off right now, transitioning from a downhill to an uphill. And, like, again, right now I'm pushing at an inefficient rate compared to my threshold power. So, like, I begin to start losing contact with this guy, and he just starts riding away from me, and, like, there's nothing I can do. Like, as strong as my mental willpower is, like, my legs just aren't there right now. And so I get dropped on this hill. So there's still one more Sakari guy and the guy who got blown off into the ditch, and they meet up with me right now. So my race isn't quite over yet. I just want to kind of hang in with this other Sakari guy. So I'm, like, kind of just chilling with him. And eventually the rider behind us bridges up with us, and then he just starts, like, completely motoring away. Like, here he is right now. He bridges up. Like, I don't know how ridiculous this guy is, but I definitely would not have caught us if I got blown off into the ditch. But this guy is bananas. Like, he just, like, chased us back down, and now he's, like, completely, like, ripping my legs apart. And eventually I'm like, no matter how hard, like, I try and keep going, like, my legs just aren't there anymore. So I begin to lose contact just a little bit, and I'm trying to, like, I'm just thinking to myself, just one more pedal stroke, one more pedal stroke, one more pedal stroke. But, like, eventually, like, they just ride away from me. So that is the end of my race. Right now, if the finish line was, like, right there in this town of Soli, I believe it was, I would have gotten 5th, but that is not how the cookie crumbles. I said it earlier in the race where the guy was smart and he kind of rode his own race. Like, he eventually caught up with me, and then, like, a bunch of Sakari guys passed me, and, like, I just wanted the race to be done at that point. I was running super low in water, and you know the old saying goes, it's fun when it's done. And I was greatly relieved when I crossed that finish line. So it was right around this point, you know, symbolically, I overheated and completely blew into pieces, and so did my GoPro. Sadly, I could not record the last... For me, it was a total of 4 hours and 5 minutes, so the last couple hours of this race. But that'll do it for this, and thanks for the race director for throwing on the Pella Roubaix. It was a great adventure. I will consider going back next year. And shout out to all of our sponsors for supporting us through our bike racing. And thank you for watching this video.